Hey everyone, I'm Mr. Hutch, and I'm going to be reading aloud The Boys Who Challenged Hitler by Phillip Hoose, so that you can follow along with me. Now, this is a nonfiction book, which is insane to think about and realize because it's true events. Now, this book is going to be talking about the experiences of Knud Petersen, which is this gentleman right here. This is the author of the book. And so he went and met with Knud to get all the primary source details to write this book, which is pretty great. So before we get started with me reading and you being able to follow along, I want you to get to watch a couple little intros here. So take a look.
The year was 1940. Eight teenagers stood by in disbelief. Nazi Germany had invaded their country, and no one was standing against them. It only took 8 teenagers to start a countrywide resistance against tyranny. A resistance that ended up with Germany losing all control and rights in Denmark. At the end of World War I, Hitler formed the Nazi Party based on his belief that the Aryan race was superior and that the Jewish race were destroyers of the world. He tried to take over the German government several times, and after he finally succeeded, attacked Poland because he believed that they were persecuting Germans. His ultimate goal was to conquer all of Europe and kill every last Jew because he believed that they were to blame for destroying the Aryan race in Germany. In 1940, Norway had a major export of iron ore, and Hitler wanted this resource to help build weapons and vehicles for his new Nazi army. In order to use this resource, Hitler needed to transport it through Denmark, so he decided to first conquer Denmark before setting his eyes on Norway.
Okay, so now that you have some background into this story, along with an understanding of the setting, now let's actually go ahead and put ourselves in the shoes of these kids. What would you actually do? I mean, if you have an army coming in, taking over your town, you could easily just suck it up and deal with it. Or do you, as kids, as 8th grade kids or whatever age, it doesn't matter, do you do something different even though all the adults are telling you not to?
What would you do if your breakfast was interrupted by the invasion of your country?
I was 14 years old when the German military invaded and attacked Denmark with practically no resistance.
What if the adults said it was for the best, told you to keep quiet, told you not to resist? But what if those invaders were the mightiest force on earth, Adolf Hitler's German army?
We young people were very frustrated and furious that the grown-up people didn't do anything.
Knud Petersen, his brother Jens, and a group of teenage classmates mounted their bicycles to confuse, to confound, to disarm, and to sabotage their Nazi occupiers. Every gun stolen from a German officer's holster, every vehicle set on fire, each explosion brought the boys closer to capture and their possible execution. They were the boys that challenged Hitler. Could you do the same?
It's time to get started, so grab your book or your digital copy, whatever you have to follow along to The Boys Who Challenged Hitler. We're going to start off with the introduction portion of the book, which is the author speaking to you to explain his story of how this book got written. And then we'll get into chapter 1 after that. All right, introduction. In the summer of 2000, I took a bicycle tour of Denmark. On the final day, I visited the Museum of Danish Resistance in Copenhagen, the nation's capital. German forces have occupied Denmark between 1940 and 1945, and the Danes are known for having put up a staunch resistance to their occupiers. One of the most dramatic episodes in all of World War II was the famous Danish boat lift of most of the nation's Jewish population to Sweden in late 1943, just before German forces could round them up and pack them by rail to death camps. But what isn't so well known is that resistance in Denmark took quite a while to get off the ground. Exhibits at the museum showed that for the first 2 years, most Danes felt hopelessly overwhelmed by the German Goliaths. They kept hope alive by gathering in public spaces to sing patriotic Danish songs or by purchasing king's badges, pieces of jewelry that identified the wearer as a proud Dane. Then I came upon a special little exhibit entitled The Churchill Club. With photos, letters, cartoons, and weapons such as grenades and pistols, the exhibit told the story of a few Danish teens, schoolboys from a northern city, who got the resistance started. Mortified that Danish authorities had given up to the Germans without fighting back, these boys had waged a war on their own. Most were ninth graders at a school in Aalborg, in the northern part of Denmark, called Jutland. Between their first meeting in December 1941 and their arrest in May of 1942, the Churchill Club struck more than 24 times, racing through the streets on bicycles in well-coordinated hits. Acts of vandalism quickly escalated to arson and major destruction of German property. The boys stole and cached German rifles, grenades, pistols, and ammunition, even a machine gun. Using explosives stolen from the school chemistry lab, they scorched a German railroad car filled with airplane wings. They carried out most of their actions in broad daylight, as they all had family curfews. So they had to be in at a certain time, but that didn't stop them, so they just made sure they did all their damage before they had to be home. The Churchill Club's sabotage spree awakened the complacent nation. One photo at the museum showed 8 boys standing shoulder to shoulder in a jail yard, all but one holding up a number as a guard looked sternly on. Another snapshot captured the boys posing in front of an ancient monastery, identified as their headquarters. They looked cocky and innocent. One was smoking a pipe. A few were clearly some time away from their first shave. This group of students looked like the last people you'd expect to risk their lives in daring raids against Nazi masters. That charm was surely part of their power. You can imagine them running errands for freight yard guards to soften them up. The museum curator said a few of the boys, now old men, were still alive. Knud Petersen, he said, was the best known and most knowledgeable of the survivors. He ran an art library downtown. The curator wrote Mr. Petersen's email address on a business card, which I tucked into my coat. A week later, back in the United States, I fished out the card and wrote a message to Knud Petersen. I wondered if the Churchill Club story had been written in English. Mr. Petersen's reply came within hours. Dear Phillip Hoose, thank you for your interest in the story about the Churchill Club, but unfortunately a contract has been signed with another American writer. I'm sorry that I'm not in a position to help you. So that was that. Someone had beaten me to the story. It wasn't the first time. I printed out our email correspondence, tucked it in a file, and forgot about it for more than a decade. Think about that. 10 years he put this idea aside. Fast forward to September 2012. I was between books and looking for a new project. Rifling through old papers, I came upon a little manila folder labeled Churchill Club. Inside, I found the long-ago exchange with Knud Petersen, among the first email messages I had ever written or received. I wondered if he was still alive and in good health. I also wondered if the other American writer's book had ever been written. It seemed like something I would know about if it had. I jotted a reintroductory message to Knud Petersen at the ancient address, pushed the send button, and turned off the laptop for the day. The following morning, a message from Knud Petersen was waiting. The other writer had not come through, he said. Now he was free to work with me immediately. When can you come to Copenhagen? Knud wanted to know. I glanced at my calendar and typed October 7th to the 14th. Seconds after I'd sent my email, you could almost hear his reply rocketing across the Atlantic. My wife, Bodil, and I will meet you at the airport. You will stay with us at our cottage. I booked the flight. 2 weeks later, my wife Sandy and I were met at the Copenhagen airport by a white-haired man, half a head taller than anyone else in baggage claim, and his wife. Canute dressed with a dash of an artist. Though we were jet-lagged, he drove us immediately to the Kunstbiblioteket art library, which he had founded in 1957. The library is a below-street-level warren of rooms, some of which contain hundreds of paintings, kept off the ground in wooden racks. For a small lending fee, a patron can take out a painting for a period of weeks, just as one can take out a book from the library. If the borrower falls in love with the painting, he or she can buy it for a reasonable price. The artist had already agreed to sell it. The art library stems from Canute's firm belief that art is like bread, an essential ingredient for nourishing the soul. Why should paintings only be available to the rich? And so he started his modest underground library. It was the first art library ever created, now beloved in Copenhagen and world famous. While Bodil and Sandy went off to see some local sights, Canute wanted to get right to work. We pulled his office door closed and settled into chairs on opposite sides of the desk. I placed a recording device on the center of the desk and turned it on. We barely budged for the next week. I got very used to Canute Peterson's face, and he mine. In all, we spoke for nearly 25 hours, pausing only for meals or to take a walk. Since I remembered just a few Danish words from my bicycle tour so long before, we had to rely on Canute's English. Canute is a fluent speaker, but conducting a week-long conversation in his second language clearly fatigued him. Still, he never complained. That week, Canute told me the story of middle school students who refused to surrender Denmark's freedom, no matter what the country's adult leaders did or said. German warplanes buzzed Denmark on April 9th, 1940. So here's some dates to be keeping in mind. Dropping leaflets informing Danes that their nation had just become a protectorate. Good vocab word, maybe. Of Germany. The German occupation was presented to Danish authorities as a choice. Comply. Give us your food and transport system. Work for us, and we'll leave your cities standing. Can you imagine if someone came and threatened you like that? You can continue to police and govern yourselves. We'll even buy materials and goods from you. You'll make money. You'll learn to like us. And after the war, you'll share in a glorious future with us. Or you can resist and be demolished. Denmark's king and political leaders accepted. Sounds convincing, right? Maybe not. On the very same day, Germany invaded Norway. Unlike the Danish, the Norwegians fought back early on. So Norway is right north of Denmark across the water. And remember from the intro, they want to take over Norway because they want that iron ore for weapons and cars and things like that. So when Hitler demanded that Norway surrender, the Norwegians officially replied, "We will not submit voluntarily. The struggle is already in progress." Skirmishes erupted throughout the Norwegian countryside and at sea. Germany captured key Norwegian ports and cities, but the Norwegian army kept fighting, moving inland to take up positions in Norway's rugged interior. Losses were heavy. As these events transpired, 14-year-old Canute Peterson, a lanky schoolboy growing up in the industrial city of Odense, Denmark, experienced deep emotions. Some for the first time. He was at once outraged by the German invasion, inspired by the Norwegians' courage, and ashamed of the Danish adults who had taken Hitler's deal. Canute and his brother Jens, a year older, gathered a group of boys around them and vowed to fight back, to achieve what they called Norwegian conditions. When the Peterson family moved to a different city, Aalborg, Canute and Jens organized a new group of brave and like-minded classmates to perform acts of sabotage. While most students were oblivious, these few stormed the streets of Aalborg on their bicycles to try to even the score. They called themselves the Churchill Club, after Britain's leader Winston Churchill, whose fighting spirit they admired. The German occupiers, first annoyed and then in rage, called for the speedy arrest and punishment of whoever was stealing their weaponry and destroying their assets. Move fast, they warned Danish authorities, or the Gestapo will take over police functions. Another vocab word maybe for you, Gestapo. The chase was on. The events, which became widely known, awakened and inspired Danes everywhere. So they gave you a nice little summary there. Okay. The next page, they show you some pictures of some German transport planes flying over the Danish rooftops and dropping propaganda. That propaganda is trying to convince the population that what's going to happen is in their best interest. So check those out. All right, Chapter 1, OPROP. April 9th, 1940. It was a breakfast like any other until the dishes started to rattle. Then an all-alert siren pierced the morning calm, and the sky above Odense, Denmark, thundered with sound. The Peterson family pushed back their chairs, raced outside, and looked up. Suspended above them, in close formation, was a squadron of dark airplanes. They were flying ominously low. Ominously? No more than 300 meters above the ground. The black marks on each wing tagged them as German warplanes. Scraps of green paper fluttered down. Knud Peterson, 14, stepped over and plucked one from the lawn. "OPROP," it began, slightly misspelled. That meant something like attention in Danish. Though the leaflet addressed to Danish soldiers and Danish people was written in an error-filled garble of German, Danish, and Norwegian, the point was unmistakable. German military forces had invaded Denmark and were now occupying the country. The leaflet explained that they had arrived to protect the Danes from the sinister English and French, that Denmark had become a protectorate of Germany. So there was no need to worry. Everyone was protected now. Danes should go on with their lives as usual. They have a little picture of the propaganda leaflets there. Knud looked around at his neighbors. Some, still in their pajamas, appeared dazed. Others were furious. Across the street, a father and his two sons stood at rigid attention on their apartment balcony, right arms thrust reverently upward toward the German planes. Mr. Anderson, the merchant who sold Tarzan comics from his kiosk on the corner, was shaking his fist at the sky. All four neighbors would be dead within 3 years. The following day, Denmark's Prime Minister, Thorvald Stanning, and the Danish King, Christian X, put their signatures to an agreement allowing Germany to occupy Denmark and to take control of the government. A terse proclamation explained Denmark's official position. The government had acted in the honest conviction that in doing so we have saved the country from an even worse fate. It will be our continued endeavor to protect our country and its people from the disasters of war, and we shall rely on the people's cooperation. All day long, German soldiers poured in Odense and other cities by boat, plane, tank, and transport wagon. So they're all the German soldiers are pouring in now. Ordinary German foot soldiers of the German Defense Force, the Wehrmacht, wore brownish-green uniforms with black hobnail boots and rounded green helmets. Well prepared, they quickly took over the town, setting up barracks and command centers in hotels, factories, and schools. Can you imagine soldiers coming in and literally just taking over the school? They pounded German language directional signs into public squares and strung miles of telephone lines between headquarters, operation centers, and barracks. By the end of the day, there were 16,000 Germans on Danish soil, and Germany was in total control. Operation Weisserabung. Just after dawn on April 9th, 1940, a merchant ship that normally carried coal sailed by Danish security forces and docked at Langelini Pier in Copenhagen. Like the Trojan horse of Greek mythology, it carried a secret. Hatches opened and German soldiers poured from the hull, fanning out through the city, seizing control of key installations. So picture this. A ship pulls up to the pier just like you would expect. It's a Danish ship, but out of it pours tons of German soldiers. At the same moment, German forces were invading other Danish cities, pouring in by air, sea, rail, and even, to secure a strategically important airport in the key city of Aalborg, paratrooper. So they're literally just pouring out of airplanes by parachute. This well-coordinated invasion, which also targeted Norway, had a German code name, Operation Weserübung, after the Weser River in northern Germany. It was over by noon. Danish forces were stunned and overwhelmed. When the darkness fell, the Wehrmacht took to the streets of Denmark to explore their new home. In Odense, Denmark's third largest city, many Danish merchants were delighted to open taps of beer or sell pastries to German troops. In fact, the huge new market seemed a windfall. German soldiers pushed into Odense's theaters, taverns, bakeries, and cafes. In the evenings, the Wehrmacht soldiers marched arm in arm through Odense's streets, weapons strapped to their shoulders, bellowing folk songs in unison as onlooking Danes cocked their head in curiosity. Knud Petersen watched from the crowd. The commander would shout, 3, 4, and they would all begin to sing. Some songs were romantic ballads, others military marches. Either way, they looked ridiculous. They actually seemed to believe that we liked them. They behaved as if we wanted them there, as if we had been waiting for them, like we were grateful for them. A tall, slender teen, Knud Petersen, had known and cared little about war or politics until that Friday morning in April. So maybe like you, all the political stuff, you don't really care too much. All of a sudden, it matters. He was a reasonably good student and handy with his fists, as you had to be at his all-boys school. But Knud's real loves were drawing and painting. Each Saturday morning, he met his favorite cousin, Hans Jorn Andersen, at the Odense Library. They went straight for the big volumes of art history. Why were they meeting at the library, looking at art history? Flip to the breathtaking nudes of Rubens or to Greek sculptures of the female figure, and started drawing. To Knud and Hans Jorn, the half-draped Venus de Milo was 100 times more interesting than the fully clothed Mona Lisa. On Sundays, after Knud's father, the Reverend Edvard Petersen, completed his Protestant church service, the Petersen family would convene in the church residency with aunts, uncles, and cousins from other branches, forming a great tribe. In the office, uncles drank and swore their way through a fast-moving, table-slamming card game called L'Ombre. Knud's mother, Margrethe, and his many aunts occupied the sitting room, knitting, sipping tea, and talking nonstop, getting up now and then to tend to the slow-cooking chickens, whose aroma grew stronger from the kitchen by the minute. Children, including Knud, his brother Jens, a year older, his sister Gertrude, 2 years younger, and his much younger brothers, Jorgen and Holger, played on the second floor, creating a painting scenery for the evening performance of Robin Hood or Snow White or Robinson Crusoe. Each child got to invite a friend. By evening, there were dozens of laughing, drinking, applauding friends and family, full and satisfied. It was like growing up in a cocoon. So we just got introduced to some characters, but they're not necessarily main characters in the story. They're just Knud's family. So we'll have to wait and see who's worth writing down as official characters in our story. We have another picture of children watching the invaders from a school bus. Knud has been only dimly aware that Germany had invaded Poland the year before, and he was oblivious to the special peril that Jews faced with Hitler in control. Before its planes arrived on April 9th, Germany had seemed no more than a neighborhood bully, a bordering country with 20 times Denmark's population and an undue influence on Danish history and culture. Even before the war, Danish students had to study German in school, learn German literature, and play German music. Adolf Hitler had not seemed a particular menace either. In 1937, the fourth year of Hitler's Nazi regime, the Petersen family had gone on a motor tour of Germany in the family's big green Nash Rambler. As they rolled through neatly cropped pastures and well-managed towns, Knute's parents expressed admiration for what Hitler had accomplished. There was a sense of order and industry in small towns and cities. Germans were at work while many other nations were still mired in a worldwide economic depression. At the end of their trip, their father had pinned a small flag with a swastika to the windshield of the car. When they re-entered Denmark, Danes in the border village, neighbors who knew the Nazis well, suggested they remove it at once. So look at the conflicting thoughts on Nazi behaviors and things like that as you go. But now all this innocence was gone. A bubble popped. German forces had also stormed into Norway on April 9th, but Norway had fought back, standing up to the mighty German war machines and paying with a heavy loss of life. In those early days after the German invasion, there were sickening news accounts of Norwegian soldiers slaughtered in defense of their nation. Many were boys in their late teens. Here's a little clip about the invasion of Norway. The German attack on Norway on April 9th, 1940, brought war to Norway for the first time in 126 years. Nearly 50,000 Norwegian troops were mobilized, but they were overmatched by German forces. Germans quickly seized control of coastal cities, and then, deploying troops especially trained for mountain warfare, went after Norwegian soldiers in the country's rugged interior. Norway held out for 2 months, hoping for support from Great Britain that turned out too little and too late. Norway surrendered after 2 months of fighting, which had left 1,335 Norwegians killed or wounded. Norwegians kept fighting at sea, employing their large fleet of merchant ships to transport goods to nations at war with Germany. Germany wiped out 106 of 121 Norwegian vessels, killing thousands. Only one of Norway's 9 submarines survived the war. So was it worthwhile? I guess you got to ask those people who fought to prevent that invasion. Meanwhile, Danish schoolchildren were being peppered with Nazi propaganda describing the glorious future awaiting them. Knud Petersen. I was in 8th grade, so this is him talking and telling you his first-person point of view. I was in 8th grade when the Germans came. We had about 2 months of school remaining until summer recess, so like summer break. The occupation was on everyone's mind, but during those weeks our teachers kept telling us not to talk about it. Don't object, don't mouth off, we mustn't arouse the giant. There were many German sympathizers on our school faculty. In Denmark, our second language was German, and our books suddenly sprouted all these articles about the happy Hitler youth who went out in the sunshine and camped and hiked through the forest and played in the mountains and got to visit old castles and all that bloody garbage. It was easy to see that was all crap.